Welcome, everybody, to SJG Perspective. Thanks for joining me. I'm probably going to sneeze right now. I'm getting over a cold. Just hit me real quick, and so my head's a little foggy. So you'll have to, put up with that. I'm a little slower than normal. So I want to talk tonight about what's going on in Iran. I want to talk about how it's escalated with them, and some of my questions I have surrounding it. You know me if you've been following me long enough. I am a Trump supporter. But when it comes to war and it comes to us meddling in other people's affairs, I don't trust our media and I don't trust what the swamp's telling us. And unfortunately, our president still has some swampy advisors around him and still has some war-hungry advisors around him. And it seems like everyone's been wanting to get into war and go to war. And it bothers me. And so that's one thing I have my questions about. I'm not saying I'm right on what we're going to look at and talk about, but it makes me wonder. There's some things here that make me wonder. And again, they've lied to us so many times. It's hard for me to believe what they're telling us is straight up the truth. Before we jump into all that, please share this out. If you are watching it, please just hit the share button right now and share it out to your Twitter, to your Facebook, to wherever. Let's get the word out here on the channel. And if you're new to the channel, like and subscribe, hit the bell notification. Okay, so I would like to start this. And this, I don't know how long this video is going to go. My nose is running. That's so gross. Sorry, it's got me choked up. Sit back with your drink or whatever, because I'm not live streaming this. Probably could. But I'm just gonna basically do a live stream. I'm not gonna edit this when I'm done. I'm just gonna put it up. So anyway, okay. So I found this article as I was reading some of this stuff, and this goes back to December 11th, right? And it says, page from now. Here's why I'm reading from RT. Okay, I already know, and I've read all the stuff that our American papers are and news sources. From CNN and MSNBC to ABC to NBC to Fox. I've been reading their articles, and I get their bent. Iran's bad. We need to stop them. We need to stop we need to put pressure on them, and it's everything they're doing. They're doing all these things to us. So I wanted to get the other perspective, coming from somebody that's going to be a little more like not necessarily supportive of Western media. It's interesting because they're also not as biased as you might think. But I'm reading a lot of these articles out of RT, full well knowing where the information's coming for. So I'm taking it a little bit with a grain of salt. But I will say, RT was right when it came to them reporting about what was happening in Venezuela and the shit show and the stuff that was being lied to us about there. They were right when they reported that the chemical gassings in Syria that were blamed on Assad were not Assad, and that they were the rebels that did it. They were right when they reported a lot of the craziness going on in Libya. So I got a sneeze coming on. It's going to kill me. So that's one of the reasons why I'm reading this. I want to get the perspective of what are we not being told right now. So one of the interesting things here was on back on the 11th of December, this article came out. Page from IROC Playbook. U.S. invokes weapons of mass destructions to pile maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. With over a year of sanctions failing to force Tehran to bend the knee, Washington is now resorting to creatively invoking weapons of mass destruction, the very same pretext the U.S. used in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We've covered this before. We know this. On Wednesday, the U.S. Treasury Department expanded sanctions against Mahan Air, Iran's largest privately owned airline, citing a 2005 executive order by then-President George W. Bush targeting weapons of mass destruction proliferators and their supporters. Mind you, nowhere in the sanctions announcement does Treasury say that Mahan actually transported WMDs. Instead, the airline is accused of flying personnel and weapons for Iran's terrorist and militia groups, and thereby directly contributing to the conflicts in Syria and Yemen. Do some research on Yemen and how hypocritical we are when we blame other people for these wars of aggression and these inhumane treatment of their people with what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. Do a little research on it with open eyes. Anyway, Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending weapons to moderate jihadist terrorists in Syria. Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending weapons to moderate, quote unquote, jihadist terrorists in Syria and arming and refueling Saudi Arabian and allied forces that have been bombing Yemen to the Stone Age since 2015. This is never mentioned, of course, nor is anyone allowed to sanction Washington for any of this, as sanctions only go in one direction. The point of the sanctions is to scare anyone away from doing any business with the blacklisted companies or individuals' image being sued by the U.S. for violating sanctions against WMD proliferators over fulfilling a catering contract, selling airplane parts, or providing ticketing services. It may sound nonsensical, but there you have it. The State Department is basically admitted to deliberately using the WMD classification to make Iranian companies radioactive to potential business partners. Our ability to work with the partners overseas to deny Iranian shippers access to ports or prevent transactions much more diplomatically persuasive when able to identify WMD or missile proliferation as the gravamen of the complaint, is how Christopher Ford, Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation, explained to the Financial Times. I'm going to reread that. Our ability to work with partners overseas to deny Iranian shippers access to ports or prevent transactions is much more diplomatically persuasive when we're able to identify WMD or missile proliferation as a gravamen of the complaint, is how Christopher Ford, Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation, explained it to the Financial Times. That the Trump administration is using the WMD gambit against Iran is particularly ironic, given that the demonstrably false accusations about WMDs were used by Bush to invade the neighboring Iraq in 2003, setting off a chain of events that claimed tens of thousands of lives and gave birth to the Islamic State. Donald Trump has long been critical of the Iraq War, and specifically the false WMD charges, only to apparently not mind when the same playbook is used against Iran. That's one of the problems I have. It's like everyone is really out to get old Iran, and this is not in a defense of Iran, thinking that they're some good regime. But I think it's really a bit hypocritical and suspicious when we demonize them the way we do and use the tactics that we do. What evidence does the U.S. have for Mahon actually proliferating any WMDs? Funny you should ask. U.S. sanctions designations require no pesky evidence or due process. They are basically imposed and lifted on the sole discretion of Treasury, without any possibility of appeal or redress. That is a mighty convenient way to bypass the burden of proof. So we have no proof that this airline company in Iran, is doing what we say they're doing, and we don't need it, but we can still use that to apply crushing sanctions to them that don't just hurt the companies, they hurt the people of Iran. Not these lunatic, idiot POSs that are running Iran. It hurts the people of Iran. Officially, the sanctions are all about U.S. solidarity with the Iranian people, as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo puts it, and punishing the government in Tehran for funding terrorism instead of spending money on social programs. It's a tempting narrative, to be sure, yet no different from the claims of neoconservative hawks in 2003 that U.S. troops will be greeted in Iraq with flowers like liberators, except they were met with IEDs instead. Again, it is particularly ironic that all of this is happening on Trump's watch and with his apparent blessing, even as the neoconservatives and Democrats have joined forces in trying to get him impeached, which I think is bullshit. In Washington, it seems the swamp always wins. So this happened. This was and it's been going on, but this is one of the more recent articles of the tensions really coming to a boiling point with Iran. So then we go up here to this next article, which was on, actually this was before that article. I thought it was after it. 6 servicemen wounded after rockets hit base on Iraqi and military U.S. forces. An Army base camp near the Baghdad International Airport was struck with a barrage of rockets on Monday amid a surge in similar attacks on U.S.-linked installations in Iraq. 6 fighters were wounded, 2 of them critically, after 4 rockets landed on the base. The Iraqi Army said security forces told AFP that the wounded belonged to an elite anti-terrorism unit trained by the U.S. The Army found a Katyusha multiple rocket launcher in the area, along with several missiles that failed to launch. No party has claimed responsibility for the attack as of yet. The airport is located next to, I'm really sorry, I'm sniffing and snotting so much. The airport is located next to Baghdad's diplomatic support center, which is used by diplomats and intelligence operatives, as well as the U.S.-led anti-terrorist coalition forces in Iraq. There have been at least 9 attacks against U.S. targets in Iraq over the course of 6 weeks. Read that again. There have been at least 9 attacks against U.S. targets in Iraq over the course of 6 weeks. Several flights that were supposed to pass over the airport have reportedly been diverted to the area northeast of the Iraqi capital due to the reports of a rocket attack. The incident comes as Iraq is gripped by a wave of anti-establishment protests, with demonstrators accusing the government of corruption and demanding they vacate their posts. We haven't heard a lot about that. Their resignation of Iraqi PM Abdel Abdullah Mahdi a week ago did little to placate the protesters, who came out in force on Sunday, including in Baghdad. The unrest has been marred by widespread violence. At least 452 people, mostly protesters, have died, and over 20,000 have been injured since the start of the action in October. Wow, I didn't know that. Been too preoccupied with this impeachment crap that we don't know that the Middle East is always burning. Don't get me wrong. There's always something going on over there in that shithole. But it's interesting that this isn't getting a little more play, that this is happening in Iraq. We do good, man, when we come in to bring democracy to these Middle East and these, Arab nations. We do a really good job at bringing democracy, man. Like, look at Libya right now. It's just doing wonderful. We are just great at that. Here's an idea. We don't do that anymore. On Friday, Iraq's top Shiite Muslim cleric called on the political leadership to pick a new PM without any foreign interference. So this happened. This article came out before the last article, but I'm kind of trying to go in succession here. So things are heating up. There's a bunch of craziness going on in Iraq that we're really not hearing about. Our tensions with Iran are ramping up, and I'm going to keep coming back to this one point. We have 60,000 troops or thereabouts sitting over there in Iran, sitting in the Persian Gulf and ready to deploy. We got like 60,000. I don't know how many warships we have over there. We've had this rhetoric going for months and months and months. We've came close to getting in some serious conflicts with Iran. The story of Iran goes back to 2003 or 4, where General Wesley Clark talks about. You can look it up. Google Wesley Clark, 9/11 interviews or something like that. It'll pop up. But General Wesley Clark talked about how back in early 2000s, we had a plan that we were going to go into 7 different nations and take them out. Libya, Syria. We'd been in Iraq and Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and somewhere else. And then we were going to maybe Turkey. And then we were going to end up, I don't know if it was Turkey or not, another one. And we were going to end up with Iran. We wanted to go after Iran forever and take them out forever. And we've always been chomping at the bit to do it for some damn reason. One of the things that was always, I was appreciative and made me really a believer and a supporter in Trump, and which I still am, but could change that. What could change that for me is us getting in a major conflict with Iran or another major war. We were supposed to be getting out of those, right? we were supposed to be getting all the troops out of Iraq. We were supposed to be getting all the troops out of Syria and out of Afghanistan. And what do? We leave them there. We add them. We add more. And this whole thing with Iran is really getting to a boiling point now. And I used to follow more international stories than I did maybe locally, or more, or nationals. And I've been so preoccupied with impeachment and all this other crap, that's been going on politically and with our pundits here against Trump, TDS at every corner, that I have gotten away from really seeing what's going on in the bigger picture. And I think we all need to focus on the bigger picture right now, and because that's really what's could be serious bad day for us if we get ourselves into a world conflict, and that dominoes would fall fast. If we get into it with Iran, a full-on, legit confrontation and regional war with Iran, that brings China, Russia, Turkey, Syria, everybody into the mix. And all of a sudden now we are going to be, it will escalate into a world war. It very easily could escalate into a world war. I don't know why we're not pulling back. I do know why. It's because there's so much power that's given to the military-industrial complex. There's so much power given to them that's really the reason why we're not pulling back. But we need to be pulling back from these wars, and we just seemingly aren't. And so there's been some escalations in the last week. Let's go to the next article here. So, U.S. civilian contractor killed. This is on the 27th. U.S. civilian contractor killed, multiple service injured in rocket attack on Iraqi base near Kirkuk. Now, you probably all know this because it's been all over the news. Unless, like I like to say, unless you've been living under a rock. It says an American civilian contractor was killed and several service members lightly wounded when several rockets struck an Iraqi military base near Kirkuk. U.S. officials confirmed on conditions of anonymity. The Iraqi military confirmed earlier that multiple service members, including a U.S. contractor and an Iraqi federal police officer, were wounded when a number of missiles struck a munitions storage facility in K-1 military base on Friday evening. According to one official, the rocket hit as a major mission was getting underway. K-1 is located just northwest of Kirkuk in northern Iraq. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. However, while Islamic State, formerly ISIS, terrorists are actively operating in the area using insurgency-style tactics, recent rocket attacks on bases housing American troops have been pinned without evidence on Iranian proxies. Now, I'm not saying that it's not Iranian proxies doing this. It very well could be. But it doesn't make a lot of sense when you have 60,000 potential missiles and guns, and you are surrounded by people chomping at the bit to annihilate you. What sense, this is just some of my common sense, and I'm not saying I'm right on this, okay? I'm open to being wrong and saying I'm wrong. But what I automatically start asking myself is, what sense does it make Iran, what sense does it make for them to poke the bear like that? To just give us a reason, to poke the bear. And here's the other thing. Trump does not want to look weak. And I believe he has people surrounding him that are chomping to get into war. And it is not beyond, this is not conspiracy anymore. Okay? It used to be like, oh, put your tinfoil hat on, man. This is like, that's not what happens. When it comes to false flag attacks to get us involved in wars. That happens. That happens all the time. There's been a lot of people prophesying or, telling people, hey, this is going to happen. It's just one false move, man, and we're at war with Iran, which, like I said earlier, is not a good thing. And so this has been set up to happen for some time. So the possibility of that being a reality is not that far-fetched. Not saying it is, but Iran hasn't came out and taken responsibility for it, why would they? But it also means that maybe they're not. Maybe it's somebody else who wants to get us involved with Iran. Maybe it's ISIS wanting to get us involved because ISIS doesn't like Iran either. So maybe it's ISIS trying to get us involved with Iran, pinning it just like what happened in Syria when the rebels gassed a bunch of people and then faked some gassings, right? and then tried to pin it on Bashar al-Assad, which has been proven to be false. That Assad never did it. But still, the story is out there, similar to Trump is a racist. He said the white supremacists were good people. Just like that trope has been used, people still push the thing that Assad gassed his people. He never did. If you didn't know that, look it up. There's plenty of information online about it. Anyway, you have to question that. Did Iran really do it? Washington's latest round of sanctions against Iran came complete with accusations of weapons of mass destruction, like we talked about earlier. While Secretary of State Mike Pompeo several weeks ago threatened Iran with decisive U.S. response if attacks against U.S. interests in Iraq continue. So this was on the 27th. This came out. Yeah. And it's talking about how Pompeo has been saying for weeks, we're going to take decisive action if you keep poking at the bear, Iran. Iran's saying, not coming out and saying, they're saying we didn't do it. They are saying that. They're saying we're not taking responsibility for that. We didn't do it. And he's saying we're itching. We got an itchy trigger finger right now to take decisive action against you, which, as we're going to soon find out, we did. U.S. strikes Kataib Hezbollah headquarters in Syria. So this came out on the 29th, 2 days after what I just read to you. U.S. airstrikes have pounded 3 Kataib Hezbollah military facilities near the town of Qom, Iraq, as well as 2 targets in Syria in response to the group's alleged bombing of the Iraqi military base on Friday, what we just read about. The U.S. carried out defensive strikes against the supposed Kataib Hezbollah facilities on Sunday. U.S. officials told Reuters the targets included weapons storage locations and command and control stations, and F-15 fighter jets were used in the attack. 3 locations near Qom on the Iraqi-Syria border and 2 locations in Syria were hit. Chief Pentagon spokesman Jonathan Hoffman said in a statement that the strikes were a response to repeated Kataib Hezbollah attacks on Iraqi bases that host Operation Inherent Resolve coalition forces. Look up OIR, Operation Inherent. I'm not going to get into that right now, but you can look that up. Reuters military sources said that at least 18 militiamen were killed in the strikes, including at least 4 local Kataib Hezbollah commanders. 2 days earlier, the same Kataib Hezbollah fighters and their Iraqi Shia allies were blamed by U.S. officials for a rocket attack on an Iraqi military base in Kirkuk. That's what we just read about, some 250 miles east of Qom. The rocket barrage killed an American contractor and wounded several U.S. troops. Kataib Hezbollah is an Iraqi paramilitary group, but is financially supported by Iran. Its allies in the so-called Popular Mobilization Forces were first deployed by the Iraqi government to combat the Islamic State jihadists in 2014, but the government has since struggled to bring them under the command of the Iraqi military. The rocket attack inflamed anti-Iran sentiment in the U.S., with Republican Senator Tom Cotton, Arkansas, warning that Tehran ought to face swift and severe consequences for its alleged involvement. So it should face, swift consequences for its alleged involvement. Responding to similar attacks, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatened Iran earlier this month with decisive U.S. response should they continue. Iran's involvement, however, has not been conclusively established. We have not conclusively established they did it, yet we're going to take decisive action against them because we think they probably did do it. Moving on. So this happened on the 1st. Reckless escalations and no more Benghazis. Dems jeer and GOP cheers as Trump points finger at Tehran after Baghdad embassy attack. So as you know, this attack happens. We bomb these 2 sites. A bunch of people in Iraq swarm the U.S. embassy. People are thinking, oh no, is this going to be another Benghazi? Which is sad in and of itself to think that we got to worry that we're going to have another Benghazi. Because we're messing with everybody in the world and we keep pushing imperialistically. It's not cool. We need okay. I got to pull myself back. We need to pull back from these wars. Why can't we take the pull back and strengthen America first, right? Take that stance first. instead of fighting and pushing into all these other countries. It's not going to end well. History shows nations that do this, it doesn't end well for them. A major partisan divide has formed around President Trump's handling of the situation in Iraq, with several Democrats blasting recent U.S. airstrikes and troop deployments, and some of the GOP lining up to voice support. Massachusetts Senator and Democratic 2020 hopeful Elizabeth Warren on Tuesday took aim at the president for a U.S. bombing raid order on Iraqi militia over the weekend. I don't care anything that Elizabeth Warren has to say, and any of these people are not going to support anything Trump does. So their opinion means dick to me, because they are just everyone on the Democratic side, and they can't see anything for the good of America. I'm not saying this is for the good of America, but if it was, they would still say it's bad. So what she has to say, I don't care. She can eat a dick. Trump's reckless decisions to walk away from the Iran deal and now launch an airstrike in Iraq without any Iraqi government consent have brought us closer to war and endangered U.S. troops and diplomats, Warren said in a statement online. It wasn't reckless for him to walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. That was a shitty deal. I don't think these airstrikes were the best idea. I'm not agreeing with Warren because I think she has anything to say that is right, but I do have to say I'm not really, I guess... On that, I have to, it pains me that I don't think we should have struck right away. We still should. We could turn them into a parking lot. Why do we have to do it right now? I don't trust what's going on. I'll continue to read. Senator Tom Udall, who sponsored a bipartisan bill with Kennedy Republican Rand Paul to prevent an unauthorized war with the Islamic Republic earlier this year, also weighed in on to slam Trump's response to the unrest, which included the deployment of Marine task force and attack helicopters to defend the embassy. No, I agree. I think you have to send in troops to defend the embassy because you got to keep our people safe there. But bombing these other places that we think Iran was involved in, and without any congressional approval, without doing conducting an act of war on a sovereign nation, is not okay. That was wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with sending the troops. You got to do that to at least save your people that are there and not let it turn into a Benghazi. But getting us into the position where people are storming the embassy, that's where the F up was. At a volatile time, the Trump administration's reckless escalation and miscalculation are endangering U.S. citizens and pushing us closer to an unauthorized war in the Middle East. Udall wrote in a tweet, adding that Congress needs to step in and stop it. I agree. Democratic president candidates and South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, whatever, joined his fellow lawmakers on Twitter to attack the president for mood swings and making policy by tweet, arguing his actions in Iraq only served to put U.S. national interests in harm's way. Far from the most dovish Democrat vying for the 2020 nomination, however, Buttigieg accepted that the policies were a response to Iranian aggression, despite disagreeing with them. Across the aisle, some Republicans were far more supportive, fully endorsing the commander-in-chief's recent move. Senator Marco Rubio, of course, because Marco Rubio loves war, the little short turd fart, credited Trump with very solid work and hailed the Marine deployment as a decisive action needed in a time of crisis, insisting there was zero question about who was behind the rocket attack on the U.S. base. Is there zero question? Because apparently nobody can nail it down and prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is question involved on this. Marco Rubio has no support from me either. That guy's a twit. One of Trump's biggest boosters as of late, Senator Lindsey Graham, also lavished praise on the president after a meeting to discuss the tense situations in Iraq. See, when all these people are lavishing praise that are known war hawks, knowing people that love to go to war, it's got to make you wonder. It's got to make you stop and just, think for a second. Okay, comparing the embassy siege to a lethal attack on the U.S. diplomatic facility in Libya in 2012, Graham urged that there be no more Benghazis. Well, duh. But getting us into one is by taking action when we don't, by bombing these, making a bomb strike. In the latest U.S. responses, the Pentagon announced a deployment of some 750 paratroopers to neighboring Kuwait on Tuesday evening, which Defense Secretary Mark Esper said could be mobilized in days to protect our people and interests, though few lawmakers have yet weighed in on the new deployment. The battle lines in Washington appear already to be drawn. Okay, so embassies attacked. We bomb, embassies attacked. Jumping forward to today. This is before the last article which is kind of worrisome, where the last, this leader of the Iraqi Revolutionary Guard was taken out today. We're going to get to that in the next article. But this one says, this is him talking. We can break America, but won't lead Iran to war. IRGC Commander says after U.S. Embassy standoff. Iran's Revolutionary Guards are not leading the country into war with the U.S., but will not hesitate to wage one if forced to. This is what is worrying me, what we're going to wake up tomorrow or the next day. The commander of the elite force said amid a row over U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. The U.S. blames Tehran for orchestrating mass protests at the U.S. Embassy in the Iraqi capital, which involved a partial takeover of the massive compound. The protest was led by Kataib Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militia group in response to U.S. airstrikes on its forces. Speaking on Thursday, Brigadier General Hussein Salami, terrible name, said the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps was not moving towards an open war with the U.S., but would not shy away from one. This is what he said, and I quote, "We are not leading the country to war, but we are not afraid of any war, and we tell America to speak correctly with the Iranian nation. We have the power to break them several times over, and we are not worried," the commander of the IRGC said, as cited by the Tasnim news agency. Kataib Hezbollah ordered its supporters to pull back from Baghdad's green zone on Wednesday, claiming a psychological victory over Washington. The angry crowd, which acted under the Iraqi government's non-involvement stance, didn't break into the main embassy building during the two-day standoff. The U.S. response to this security crisis was to deploy additional troops to Iraq. So Salami comes out and says, "We don't want a war, but we'll give it to you if you screw with us." Well, guess what we did? Just coming out today. Came out a few hours after this. So that guy said that, and a few hours later, he's dead. Oh, sorry, not there yet. Pentagon chief threatens Iran with preemptive. So then we come out and we say, make sure that I'm right on our time frame here. Yeah, so this was done at like 11. This was done at 3. Pentagon chief threatens Iran with preemptive action if embassy attacks continue. Well, they've already stopped. They've already pulled back. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper has warned that he will take preventative action to protect U.S. forces if he receives word of attacks by Iran or its proxy forces claiming to have indications of such attacks in the future. Esper said he expects more provocative behavior by Iranian-backed groups and warned that they will likely regret it. So we say we're going to take preventative action because we think you're going to do something, and has warned that if you do anything, we're gonna preemptively strike. They've been attacking our bases for months now, Esper claimed, apparently pinning every rocket attack on a coalition base in recent months on Iran. He called on Iraq to do more to address these Iran-sponsored militia groups and to stop their attacks on U.S. coalition forces, complaining the U.S. has not seen sufficient action on that front from Baghdad. The Trump administration blamed Tuesday's siege on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad on Tehran and sent 750 troops to Iraq in order to beef up security of the diplomatic compound. Iran President Donald Trump has said will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities. However, the protesters who surrounded the embassy were motivated by rage over U.S. strikes that killed 25 members of Kataib Hezbollah, part of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Units, PMU, and officially part of the Iraqi military. Tehran, they're part of the Iraqi military, and this is so confusing. Tehran, meanwhile, has accused the U.S. of Tehran, meanwhile, has accused the U.S. of punishing it for defeating an Islamic State terrorists. It slammed the audacity of Washington fobbing responsibility for the protests off on Iran when U.S. airstrikes, supposedly in response for an attack on a coalition base near Kirkuk, had actually motivated the embassy storming. So they stormed the base because they got bombed. 25 people were killed. That's why they stormed it. And we're blaming Iran. And Iran's like, how can you blame this on us when you're the ones who bombed these places? Cliff Note version. The Trump administration rhetoric regarding Iran may trigger deja vu for those who remember the most recent Iraq war, with its talk of preemptive strikes against Saddam Hussein. The Iraqi leader was said to be sitting on a cache of weapons of mass destruction and had stopped before he could use them. Now known to be complete fiction, the weapons of mass destruction trope has been recycled in the Trump administration's sanctions on Iran, deeming the country's largest airline a weapon of mass destruction proliferator. We read about all that. The U.S. could send still more forces to the Middle East, as per said, pledging to take it day by day. A variety of forces are standing by in case they are needed. Right, here's what I was talking about earlier. Joint Staff General Mark Milley said the U.S. has some 60,000 troops in the region already. So we got 60,000 troops in the region, and we think Iran is poking the bear or poking the eagle. We think that they are poking at us when we have all these people with itchy trigger fingers ready to just annihilate Iran. Does that make sense? That doesn't really make sense if you just look at it logically. Now, I'm not saying it is logical, and I'm not saying they didn't do this. I'm just saying I pause and I have question. It's enough to give you pause. Just like pausing to take a drink. So we said all of that, and then this is what happened today. A couple hours after Salami said that we're ready to give you war. Pentagon says Trump directed assassination of Iran Quds Forces Chief Salami to deter future Iranian attacks. U.S. President Donald Trump has authorized U.S. military attacks near Baghdad's airport, which resulted in the death of Iran's Quad Force commander, Qasem Soleimani. Is that the same guy? Maybe that's not the same guy. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I want to read this. Sorry. Pause this real quick. Okay, so I stand corrected. The guy who said this earlier today, that they'll give us war, was not the same guy who died. I thought it was, man. All these Middle Eastern Hussein, Salami names kind of blend together. My bad. Regardless of that, let's get back to this. So today what we did is we bombed, at the direction of the president of the U.S. military, has taken decisive action to protect U.S. personnel abroad by killing Qasem Soleimani, the Pentagon said in a statement. This strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans. The United States will continue to take all necessary actions to protect their people and interests wherever they are around the world. How about we pull our interests home? Our interests aren't out there. Let's pull our frickin' interests home. And our boys and our women, our men and our women, let's pull them home. The Pentagon said that the assassination was a response to attacks on coalition bases in Iraq, accusing Soleimani of being the mastermind behind a recent spate of missile attacks on joint U.S. and Iraqi military installations. In particular, the Pentagon blamed Soleimani for orchestrating the December 27 rocket strike at a U.S. base in Kirkuk that killed one American contractor, as well as approving the siege of the U.S. embassy in Baghdad that almost ended up in the compound takeover by protesters furious over the U.S. strikes that killed 25 members of Kataib Hezbollah, part of Iraq's popular mobilization units, over the weekend. Okay, so here we are. Here we are. We are itching to get in war, and I don't know who to believe on what's really going on. I have a hard time believing our news sources and the officials telling us that all of this is Iran, that all of these problems are these attacks from Iran. We need to go in because they're itching, like I've been saying, to go into Iran. They've been known to lie to us before. So what my point in putting this out is it should give us pause to think and to ask ourselves, is this really what they say it is? Because right now it'll be interesting to see what the response is. The response was the storming of the embassy when we bombed a couple military bases for Kataib Hezbollah. What is the response going to be? So then the embassy siege, they pull back from the embassy siege, and then we bomb in the Baghdad airport. We bomb and kill how many people? I don't know. I want to say it was 5 or 6. We wiped out 5 or 6 of these, of the head of the head, Iran Quds Force commander, Qassam Soleimani. We killed him and a whole bunch of other of his commanders and some other people that were with him. What's going to happen tomorrow or the next day? We are ramping this up when we were supposed to be pulling back. That's what Trump said he was going to do. So if we're going to be consistent as patriots to putting America first and to caring about our country and to caring about our families here in our country and our boys and our girls in this country that are coming up, that are going to be going into the military, if we care about them, shouldn't we care about pulling back from these wars and not doing stuff that pushes us deeper in them? I know we can't be weak. I get that. But we're not weak. We're the strongest military force in the world right now. And so we don't have to flinch when somebody throws a punch. We should know beyond a shadow of a doubt who threw that punch, and then I fully believe we should respond with overwhelming force. But we need to know who it is that does it before we respond with overwhelming force, beyond a shadow of a doubt. We need to take the time to make sure whoever it is we say is guilty is truly guilty. And then we respond accordingly. And by accordingly, I mean turn them into a parking lot for all I care. Honestly, if you F with us, my foreign policy is pull everybody back for as much as possible from around the world, rest our military, build up our military capabilities, and then just sit there and say, we're not going to screw with you, but if you screw with us, we'll turn you into a parking lot. If we find out you did it, we'll get in, we'll get out, we'll turn you into a parking lot. If we did that, there wouldn't be many people messing with us. There wouldn't be, and people wouldn't be so pissed that we're always going out and we're just, in essence, a swamp, the military-industrial complex, who has control over the nation and many times over the president, all the other presidents, pushes for these wars because it makes so much damn money. And we have so many interests, oil interests, and we have so many other things going on that we push for these things when we shouldn't be. We should be pulling back. And our military, swampy industrial complex, whoever you want to call them, the deep state, whatever, they want these wars. And it does raise the question, which people get called anti-Semitic for, when they say, yeah, but should we be doing this for, who's helping us with or pushing for some of these extra wars, or who's pushing for us to be involved in these? Well, sometimes it's Israel. And we need to check that. We need to put that in check. I'm not saying abandon them or not, support them. That is not what I'm saying. But supporting them over our own goodwill and over our own interests makes you shake your head. I don't fully understand it and how deep down the rabbit hole that whole shit show goes. But either way. Well, I doubt anybody hung out for this whole video, but if you did, you're a amazing person. And if you did, you should put a comment saying you listened to the whole thing. You will get a special gift from me of something, a shout out or whatnot. If you watch to the end, you can put a comment that you watched to the end, and I'm going to do something special for you alone, because you are as John Ward would say, you are a world champion. So that's what I'm going to do. Anyways. Until next time, it's SJG Perspective. I appreciate everybody being here and who hung out. And I'm sorry I was so snotty, man. I'm just like, ugh. Please don't forget to subscribe to some of my other media sites, Parler, BitChute, DLive. And we'll be coming with a live stream this weekend. And until next time, it's SJG Perspective. We'll talk to you later. Bye.